and welcome back on this Thursday morning. Let's quickly go over that forecast. 64 degrees out there. We will see some partly cloudy skies today. Of course, we do have rain moving on in the later hours today with your high temperatures around 80. With those warm temperatures could bring some bad storms. Irony, today is the 40th anniversary to the deadly tornado 40 years ago, of course, but let's quickly go over that weekend forecast. Looks like tomorrow is the biggest day for rain, and quite a bit of it, with your high temperatures of 72, and then Saturday, things drying out with 64 as your high. Here we go.
A minute and a half now before 8 o'clock. It has to be a memorable night for thousands of people, and of course families, and of course I'm including myself here tonight. I've never experienced anything of this type, and I'm still pretty well shook, to say the least. Bill Dunnavant will be giving us reports throughout the evening. He's in traveling with a caravan with the Sheriff's Department and trying to follow the path of the tornado and searching for those who are injured and victims who are in need of help. Again, repeating you, they have requested folks to meet out at the East Limestone School in that particular area and assisting them in trying to find people who might be hurt in the tornado debris. I think this will go down probably in history of Limestone County as the worst disaster that we've experienced in some time.
And there it was, Mr. Mike Davis. That was your voice saying at the end as you pitched to Bill Dunnavant out, saying this could go down in history as one of the worst storms ever in the history of Limestone County. You remember that night?
I was scared to death.
Well, before you get on that story, this is former probate judge Mike Davis, Bill Dunnavant, former owner of the radio station next door, Fred Lackey, former minister down at First Baptist Church, now at Clements, and Frank, also part of the radio. Is this the first time y'all been together in 40 years?
I guess it is.
Wow.
We should do the reunion tour, right?
Yeah, well, 40 years ago, of course, as I told you, that was my fourth day on the job, and we shot film all day in Huntsville. You guys, it said here, we had never in this book, and that's kind of, as Fred brought this book in, Bill, you've already got one. You guys are quoted all in this book, F5 here, saying this was the deadliest night. Limestone County had never, Bill, do you remember Limestone County ever experiencing anything like that before?
No, and you know, after all this happened, I went back and started looking into something like this back in the late 20s. And because, you know, a lot of us grew up afraid of what our kinfolks call a cloud. But
Coming a cloud.
Yeah, and just, you know, there's nothing in our era that was like this, you know.
And you guys had the radio station, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. And Fred, your deal that night, you were just out traveling around or what?
We had been at church before we went down to the Lawson Trailer Park.
That was on a Wednesday.
On a Wednesday, midweek service. Buddy Evans, of course, was a sheriff at that particular time and a member of First Baptist Church. When the tornado hit it hit Lawson Trailer Park first, and so he called me and asked me to gather some guys up and help dig through the rubble and see if we could dig some folks out and get them to the hospital. So about 10 of us, Jamie, got in our two church vans and went to Lawson Trailer Park and began the rescue there, digging the folks out of the rubble and putting them in ambulances that were available and getting them to the hospital. That was the result of the first tornado that came through. And while we were there in Lawson Trailer Park, the killer, we called it the killer tornado, came through and blew over us, and from that point on we were busy the rest of the night, the next day, doing rescue missions. I'm known as the pastor that stole the ambulance.
All right, hold that thought. I want to get back to that in just a minute. That's what Sheriff Blakenfeld last week. Frank, what were you doing that night in part of the JMW?
I was on the board and on the air, and I was mid or late afternoon, I believe, when the first one hit. And Bill, of course, got in our mobile unit, which we call Rover.
King Country Rover is what it calls it here, Bill. Maybe that's where I stole that idea from you.
And that's when it hit Lawson Trailer Park. So Bill goes down, and he was reporting the damage and this type of thing. And all of a sudden, he says, there's another one coming across the field. Well, he stood down, and it's like a football game. He was doing a play-by-play description of it. how close it was getting to debris and all that, how big it was and this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden he said, "It's here, I'm gone." And then went dead.
Oh, my
I didn't know if the tornado had got him or what happened. So he came back then, about 10 minutes later, he came back on the air and come to find out he had waited till the tornado got right on him and he jumped in the ditch as it went over him. And that's when he said, "It's here, I'm gone." So I thought he was gone with the tornado, you know.
But y'all stayed on the air the whole time. And Mike, now you were on the air at the time. Now, here's a quote from this book. And then you tell me.
Can you read, Jamie?
It says, "You folks please be rushing or not rushing, but getting on to a place of shelter." Then you say, "Spring is officially here," said a chipper voice. Now was this a commercial or was this you saying this? And it said, "And that means summer is just around the corner at Rose's department store.
Yeah.
Summer means swimming. Plastic pools are available for $6.96, and a 5-foot whip slide was on sale for $14.88. Before the ad ended, Mike returned to the air. Now the softness was gone from his voice. He sounded official. At 22 minutes before 7 o'clock, here's Spencer Black of Civil Defense.
It happened that quick. When I first got to the radio station that afternoon, there was very few clouds in the sky. It was a beautiful day. And those clouds rolled in so quickly. And the weather changed. And not only did it change drastically, it made an impact that
Well, now
I'll never forget.
Frank brought a newspaper from April 3rd, that day before, and it said tornado. Here's a tornado rips through county. Well, this was not the big tornado that came that night.
First one.
So you were scared. When did you get scared that night?
I became frightened for two reasons. One, my family was at church, and I didn't know whether they knew about it. Secondly, I became very frightened when Spencer was talking about the massive tornado coming across the river, the F5, within a half mile, projected within a half mile. And the projection then was purely based on speculation. Because
Now, is Spencer on the radio with y'all at the time, or is he in the studio?
No, he was at his the Civil Defense office.
And you know another one's on its way.
Yes. And it's at that point that I tried to warn Bill and the other folks at the Lawson Trailer Court that they needed to take cover. This was a biggie.
Was this the first time? How long had you been at the radio station till then? So you're 20-something years old.
I started there when I was a junior in high school. So figure that out, 17.
Was this the first time y'all ever had to do anything like this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this was big.
All right, but one of the keys to this, and Bill, you told me this today, and it's in the book, you had just, cassette tapes had just come out.
Yeah, but had just been invented by Norelco.
And you had just got a machine, and you told, as you were leaving that day, you told Mike to flip this when it runs out. So had you not recorded that, we would not have had any of this audio we have.
Right.
So how did the night go for you? Explain what happened that day in your perspective.
It was a blur, as most of us would, I say, probably at this time. But I remember the day being very eerie feeling. It was a beautiful day, but it was either, I couldn't remember if the air was heavy or what, but there was just an eeriness about it and an unsettled feeling about it. I remember coming out of what is now the county commission building, the old post office, and looking up at the sky and saying, something doesn't feel right. Because, we'd had the one the day before, and, we didn't have a lot of tornadoes. We'd have one occasionally, and, we kind of figured that was it the day before. But one of the things we had done several years earlier is we had invested in a direct line to Civil Defense with Spencer Black. And so we had a hotline in the studio, and when it rang, you picked it up, and we could put Spencer immediately on the air.
Good.
So that gave us a direct connection with anything weather-related or news-related that we needed.
Was anybody else in the market doing anything similar to that then?
Well, not in Athens, certainly, and of course you had the TV stations in Huntsville. But one of the little-known things is WJMW, which is now WVNN, at the time was a daytime-only station. So in that time of the year, we would have signed off at about 5:45 or 6 o'clock. But under the Federal Communications rules, we were able to declare an emergency and stay on all night. So besides just our FM, which was WJOF, we had WJMW also providing coverage for people. So we were doing that under an emergency state ourselves.
So you go out in the King Country Rover van that you got. Who's with you?
That
By myself.
You're by yourself. Now, where do you set up?
Well, The van had complete operations inside it. I mean, we had a mobile communication system there, plus we had a little console set up where if we wanted to, at remotes, we could play records. But we just pull up and turn the transmitter on and start talking. I mean, that's all I had to do. But to me, I go back, the funniest thing to me of it all, if you can look at humor, and you kind of have to when something like this happens, I got to, Browns Ferry Nuclear Power Plant, was a big thing here. And I got to the first set of power lines across Highway 31, and they were all down in the road. And all I could think was I was going to be electrocuted. And so I held my feet up as I went over. But realizing later that they never even had any power on those lines, But then I got to Lawson's, and I just got in the middle of the road. I got in the median. I went out on the southbound side, and I just got in the median there and just started talking.
Now, when you jumped in the ditch, did you literally say, is that on the broadcast that you said, I'm out of here?
I think
there's some pictures I know from the book of people laying in a ditch.
I think the audio said something like "I'm gone" or something like that. I can't remember. I just remember that my dad was on the other end also. He was on the FM station monitoring the broadcast, and people for years told me how excruciating it had to be for my dad, knowing that I was gone for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, not knowing.
Mike, when did y'all first start finding out, or Frank, whichever one y'all can answer this, that people were killed in this tornado?
Immediately after Bill came back on, he, of course, he didn't know for sure, but he gave a pretty good indication that very possibly could be some death, and so we knew immediately that the possibility was there, but it was probably 30, 40 minutes before anything was confirmed about deaths.
Now, Fred, in your case that night, and being a preacher and everything, when did you know that people were seriously injured?
Well, immediately after the second one, which we referred to as the killer tornado, it came over, it hit Tanner Baptist Church. There were some folks in that general area, about 3, I think, that were killed as it swept through. And then, of course, it came from the east to the west with this devastation throughout Limestone County. And Jamie, I remember, of course, I remember Bill and Mike and them being there and kind of they were talking to us too, because about that time, we looked up and the killer tornado was coming toward us. We saw it just completely explode 2 farmhouses. And that's a good picture of it, because I remember looking at it and thinking, well, that looks like a dragon with a tail, because that tail was going back and forth. And it was actually the tail that hit those 2 houses that demolished them. And I remember Sheriff Evans saying, "Hey, fellas, here it comes toward us." And so I mentioned this in the book, that in that instant, it was strange to me how I had the power of recall. I remember reading an article about 20 years prior to that in the Reader's Digest about some guys caught in a similar situation and how they locked hands and hit the ditch. And so I suggested that we do that, and so we did, about 20 of us, and we hit the ditch. Sheriff Evans was the last one to hit the ditch. He didn't get completely in the ditch, and I looked down to my right, and I saw him grabbing for grass and stuff as that tornado almost picked him up out of that ditch as it came over us. And Bill mentioned the fact that the air was heavy, and at that particular time, there was a vacuum that just sucked the oxygen out of the air, and none of us could hardly breathe. I remember looking up, and there was a automobile that came right over us, not more than 10 or 12 feet over us.
Wow.
And then, Jamie, just after that, Sheriff Evans asked us to go out to East Limestone, where Don Lauderdale and the McBays were, and we spent the rest of the night rescuing them and stealing an ambulance.
I want to hear that story in just
Yeah,
a
we
second. I
can
want to hear
talk
more
about
from Mike, too. I want to take a break right now and ask that. I want to run some more of the audio from that night with Bill, Mike, and Frank. And then Stanley Menifee's also new. He'll join us in just a second, too, to talk about 40 years ago when that happened. Let's take a short break here, run some of that audio, and we'll share some more video with y'all in just a second. Y'all hang on.
Bill.